All right, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Kushner Report for May 2022. I'm Robert Brancatelli, and of course, you know Dennis Kushner. You can reach us at fordhamroad.net, and you'll be able to contact us via email, etc. there. Also, the recording is only for the presentation, as you know, and it will be available on that website. Probably we'll upload it tonight, maybe by tomorrow morning at the latest. Also, we are going to be ending at 15 minutes after the hour, 9:15 Pacific. So we want to keep to that. And yeah, please mute yourselves during the presentation. And of course, once we're through with that, I think, you know, we have the Q&A, and that will be open. So Dennis, it's all yours.
Okay, well, good morning. It's glad everybody's on board. I was going to say, Robert and I, together with the people that we've collected around the country and you guys that we've dragged in off the streets, we now have over 160 people that participate in the program, either live on phones or a lot of the folks are back east. We've got 3 or 4 now that are outside the United States. So it's kind of fun getting more folks involved in the program. So what I'd like to do this morning is kind of give you an overview. So welcome aboard. And at the conclusion of the session this morning, we're going to have a question and answer period, and hopefully you'll participate. And as Robert mentioned earlier, we'll cut off the recording as soon as I'm done with the last slides and we go into Q&A. So this morning, we're going to cover the agenda. We're going to cover the key economic indicators, the global economy, the domestic economy, mergers and acquisitions, other significant economic news, and what's ahead in 2022. And what I want to feature this morning is the biotech outlook for 2022, which is very interesting. You don't hear a lot about things in the area, but I've got some good information for you this morning. So let me give you a little quick overview. So over the past 2 years, the pandemic has had a profound impact of the biotech sector. You know, industry has been faced with pressure to be better organized, to bring back certain pharma solutions to the United States, to the market in a more expedient manner. And that's what we're seeing happening now. A lot of drug manufacturing, design and so forth is being brought into the United States where it should be for our own country. We see more moving parts in the sector, such as issues with supply chain, inventory levels, merger and acquisition activity. We also see a shortfall in the biotechnology workforce, that there's a demand for more professionals in this area. And you don't have to be a doctor or a PhD. There's a tremendous opportunity to get involved in this sector. And we also see costs rising in developing new COVID vaccines and other treatments in 2022. And as I mentioned a few months ago, artificial intelligence is attracting more investments in the medical field. So when we look at the biotechnology market and industry for 2022, you know, today, one thing is certain, that we all live in a world of constant change, and there are changes in every aspect of daily existence and in new technological breakthroughs and advancements in knowledge every day. And you see that in the forefront of news that's either in the media, online, or on the news on your radios and televisions. In terms of human health, this includes the understanding of diseases so mankind can benefit from the studies and research and fight against these health pandemics going forward. So I want to take a look at some of the aspects here. So if we look at personalized medicine, the research industry has become more expansive. Many scientists and field experts have discovered a lot of things, discovering conditions that are inherent because of genetics. And the implications of these, our healthcare can be more personalized and customized based on human DNA and some other personalized genomics, as we've spoken. And I told you last year, 2 books were released on major breakthroughs in DNA, especially in line with what's going on now with pandemic and its ongoing variations. So in the area of drug research, this year we'll see a continuation of trends in biotech that features continued improvement and development of drug research. In collaboration, in 2022, biotech corporations and companies are expected to join forces and collaborate with other health-related science organizations so that we can all together push the industry and aim for better results. Again, a lot of this is taking place as we move forward. In the area of drug research, this year we'll see continuing trends in biotech and features continuing improvement and development of drug research. You know, with the advent of smart technology, will continue to allow the possibility of improving and assessing diagnosis and treatment using medications. The treatment of patients, well, the transformation and evolution of the digital aspect of businesses have been around for centuries. And there will be definitely an increase in the digitalization of aspects of biotechnology through the possibility of online and remote assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of patients around the world. So we're going to see more of this type of integration going forward, which are major breakthroughs. In the area of research, with the advances of biotech, many researchers are now focusing on many of the different life science fields that will improve the quality of life, such as precision surgery, immunotherapy, and genetics. For example, on the aspect of precision surgery, there's been a rise in the studies of robotics to improve surgical procedures and therefore corresponding surgical outcomes. So you're seeing more of that taking place now. In terms of value-priced products and so forth, there are more laws and regulations and protocols that are passed to drive down the prices of biotech products produced in pharmaceutical and neuroceutical laboratories. And in fact, more and more companies are now showing real live demos, if you will, of drug efficacy. So this is very good news going forward. And in terms of the cloud, using the cloud, we use it for other things. Now we're seeing that previously data management in this area was very difficult to collate, organize, and interpret. However, with new development in cloud technology and management, we're now seeing the ability to store and handle a volume of data information produced in the laboratories. And therefore, now the data management professionals can basically organize their information so biotech professionals can easily access, analyze, and interpret data. So a lot of this is taking place from a lot of the stuff that we saw being done in the technology space, especially in Silicon Valley. Improved timelines. In the past, critical medications were held for long periods because of the long process with the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration. With technological advances, government regulatory boards can now improve drug testing and speed. So I spent time with a company called Genentech, who's in the Bay Area, one of the leaders in the area. And if you talk to some of the guys about 10 years ago, they'll tell you that from the beginning of developing the drug, taken all the way through where it's approved for the FDA so you and I can have access to it, it could take as much as 10 years to get it approved, and it could cost as much as $5 billion in the end. But now, because we're changing processes and methodologies with the advent of technology, things are getting a lot better and we're shortening the process. We have to do this to be more competitive in the world markets as well, where we compete with other areas. In terms of genetic treatment, with the improvements in biotech, there's an increasing using of genetic information in the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of illnesses, especially chronic diseases and disorders. And finally, we have what we call the immune cell function. And that is immunity of growing areas of study under the biotech branch of science, because the power to prevent the spread of harmful diseases. So this is taking place more and more. A lot of this is being done with the CDC and other organizations back east. Now let's take a little bit of a look at what we see happening in terms of the projections and statistics for 2022. Already we've seen almost $428 billion has been spent in the medical field this year in the biotech industry. And neurosurgical divisions is an industry that needs more scientific evidence to pertain to existing and new derivatives of the drugs. So the environmental sectors and sciences needs public awareness and more innovation. So in other words, you can hear of a drug breakthrough online, maybe you get something from Bay Bio or something, but we need to be having this information communicated more to the public in the area of good news, of breakthroughs in medicine and technology, which we don't seem to have a lot of right now. Now, the sad thing is 1 in 6 people globally are dying from cancer, and that represents 16% of the world population. And 10% of the deaths around the world are due to neurological disorders. And like I said, Genentech is credited with starting the modern biotechnology industry. Again, all this started in Silicon Valley, working with the technology companies. So this is great stuff. And then again, we talk about the impact in the economy and growth, tremendous opportunities for young people and some of the old people like us to get involved in the industry a tremendous amount of job opportunities in this particular sector, and it's going to grow and grow and grow. And it's wide open fertile areas for people to take advantage of this particular area. Believe it or not, the top areas in the United States for biotech companies, if you can believe this, is New Jersey and Connecticut. I would have thought it was the West Coast. So that kind of gives you an overview of the biotechnology area. I spent most of my career in the Bay Area working in biotech and high tech, and it's exciting about all the breakthroughs that are taking place. About 3 years ago, there was a fellow that was in a wheelchair. He was a paraplegic, quadriplegic, sitting in a wheelchair, and was going to be given the Congressional Medal of Honor by a former president. And what happened is they put a chip in his spine. This came out of the Bay Area, a chip in his spine and a little computer on his hip attached to his belt. He was able to regulate that. He got up out of the wheelchair and went over, and Obama presented him with the Congressional Medal of Honor. And there's all kinds of great things going forward. That it's exciting to me. I'm not a doctor, but I read a lot of the information. So this is good stuff going forward. So now what I'd like to do is talk about key economic indicators. And I'm going to cover the gross domestic product, inflation, unemployment at the federal and the state level of California, and then the price per barrel of oil. So for 2022, the global GDP is looking more like 3.1%, and then towering down a little bit to 2.4 when we move to 2023. In the United States, our GDP is looking more like 2.4% this year. This is an upgrade from our last program. And then next year, dropping down to 2%. The biggest concern we have right now is, as you know, inflation ran at 8.3% last month, is getting it down to 7.6 or lower. And a lot of that's going to be based upon what the Federal Reserve does going forward over the last half of the year. And then we're looking at, in 2023, we're looking at 7.6% inflation. We look at the unemployment picture now, it's targeted for 3.5% by year end, and next year dropping down to 3.3%. The state of California typically is the last to go into a recession, and it's the last to come out. What we're looking at, unemployment right now is at 4.4% projected for year end, followed by 4.1% at the end of next year. This is where we have a paradox, and that is if you look at the price range on the price per barrel of oil. If you remember about a year ago, we were down in the $20 and $30. It closed the other day at $110.40. So there's a range there. And earlier in the year it was well over $130. So it's all over the board. And a lot of this is going to have to do with production. And I'll talk more about that when I get into the other part of the presentation. Now let's take a look at the global economy. So faced with concerns about inflation, multiple central banks around the world have tight monetary policies like the United States. So the Federal Reserve of Australia has initiated rate hikes of 25 basis points last month. And they're facing, even though the economy is improving, they're still faced with a tremendous amount of inflation. In the United Kingdom, 9% rise in price index, which is the highest since they've recorded records in that country. It's a 9% on food and energy, which is unbelievable. It's much higher than we have here. The Bank of England basically delivered a 25 basis point hike last month in May, early part of the month, and their plan is to raise it up to almost 1% sometime by July. Latin America, the outlook is basically Latin America, the region will return to meager economic growth path prior to what we saw with the COVID pandemic. So here we're looking at a forecast of 2.1 and 2.2% respectively for 2022 and 2023. So although it'll be light, it won't be in the negative area. So let's take a look at the United States. Our first quarter, we got killed. We saw the GDP go out at 1.4% pace. It fell by 1.4%, and that's how the year started. Speculation this morning out of Wall Street is projecting, again, it's a projection, second quarter is looking like maybe 1.3%. So the first half of the year is not looking good. And the construction area, which is critical, by the way, I want to make one point here, is that economists are optimistic about a couple of critical factors. So number one, imports soared by 20% as Americans began to spend heavily on foreign-made products. Exports fell almost 6%, but the growth steadied overseas. And secondly, businesses have been building inventories aggressively since what we saw happen last year when the ships came in and a lot of the Christmas products were still being held on ships until March. So companies are building inventories in terms of expectations for getting down the inflation rates going forward and having product on the shelves with better pricing. Higher costs appear to be weighing on the construction industry. The total construction industry spent about 1/10 of a point in March, and then we saw in February about 5/10 of a point. But total spending year over year is up almost 12%, which is very good news. If we look at supply chain, the latest economic data suggests that the challenges worsened in April as delivery times lengthen, and while employers continue to add jobs at the solid pace, the supply chain had a negative effect on the labor output. So we're still seeing that happening. And that's again, because we've got to get things moving in the various harbors around the United States. In the case of Jerome Powell, he's been retained by the Senate for another 4-year term. And he's going to be faced with some serious challenges, and that is in reducing inflation while preventing a recession in the months ahead. Now, a couple of people have asked about recession. Right now, there's about a 30% feeling around the country that we could go into recession by year end. And the speculation, it could be a soft landing. The area we have to be concerned about here is how many rate hikes will it take to do something about inflation, but at the same time, not risk seeing companies laying off personnel. That's going to be the concern we have going forward. And we'll see more of that as we get into June and July when the Federal Reserve gets more active. So one of the questions is raised is, do gasoline prices and supply chains issues affect inflation? Well, first of all, when gasoline prices exceed $5 a gallon, for the most part, the economy tends to experience what's called demand reduction. And in demand destruction, whereby consumers and businesses reduce spending because of higher prices. Now, if you look at the supply chain issue on impact, it's had a tremendous impact. The interconnectedness of global supply chains means that when one price goes up, other prices are going to tend to follow. So we've seen an increase in labor, energy, and transportation costs contributing to inflation across the board. And it poses a tremendous effect on policy decisions and monetary policy going forward. So to give you a little bit of insight on inflation, I mentioned that last month inflation was at 8.5%. In the month of April, inflation hit 8.3. So we see signs of it starting to leveling off right now, and hopefully that will continue. It still remains about a 40-year high of what we've seen over the last several years in terms of the price of goods, services, and the broader economy. In the area of trade exports, we saw an increase of 17%. So we're up about $105 billion last month, actually going back to March, because it's usually a 2-month lag. And then when we look at the trade deficit, here's a huge red flag. And that is the basis right now, we're looking at a deficit of around $89 billion each month. Now, if we extrapolate that out, we're talking about almost $1.1 trillion of trade deficits going forward. And that's extremely harmful to our economy. In the area of retail sales, spending rose for the 4th month in a row as inflation remained high, with airlines, gas stations, retailers are using complex algorithms basically to adjust their prices in response to cost, demand, and competition. So let's take a look at the employment picture on a national level. So the good news is we saw another increase of 428,000 jobs in April. We still have a very strong market out there, and the unemployment rate remained flat at 3.6%. The key is, again, if you look at vision and professional services, that's been ongoing up continually over the last almost 24 months. The key you want to look at here is leisure and hospitality, which suffered the worst during the downturn. And of course, manufacturing, which is near and dear to everyone's heart. We're seeing more jobs being created and more processes coming back into the United States across our country. This is very good news going forward. Now, the other thing I forgot to mention is we still have 11.5 million job openings around the United States. And again, we see job openings every place: Walmart, Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King, they're still trying to hire people, and we'll have to see when that's going to change. California had a modest 41,000 jobs in the month. The real key here, we saw a downturn in construction. And the reason we saw a lot of this in construction is because it's harder to get some of the supplies people need to complete the projects taking place. There's a fire station in Carlsbad, California that's been renovated, and they've lost 2 more months in getting the program done because they can't get products to finish the design of the building. So it's going to be probably done now in August. It should have been done in March. So again, its limitations were based on supply availability and also on people. Now, I'd like to take a look at the at interest rates. The key here is this: the Federal Open Market Community Group got together last month, as you know, and they raised it 50 basis points, and as expected, and you'll see that. So we're at 75 right now, probably going up to 1. When we get to June, there's speculation of 3 options. Number 1, no change at all. Number 2, 25 basis points, and number 3, 50 basis points. So around the 14th and 15th of June, we'll have a better idea what's going to take place, and I'll be able to report on that when we have our next meeting. The thing that's interesting is the committee also announced they're starting effectively June 1st to reduce the balance sheet, which stands at $8.9 trillion, a small number, if you will. The idea is to start dropping down $30 billion a month in treasury bills to start moving them off the balance sheet. So that's going to start taking place beginning in June. Mortgage rates, you know, the average across the board, not where Sid lives and not where we live, but just in general across the board, it moved up to 5.42%, and that's up from 5.25% a couple of weeks ago. Now, what that's also doing is that we've seen in the application for mortgages drop more than 13% last month. And the biggest concern is, you'll see that as we talk about company displacements, the concern is in December, as I mentioned before, that 30% of new home buyers were first-time buyers. So this is going to start having an affordability issue going forward in terms of A, refinancing, and B, buying new properties. But the real estate market is still very strong, as you can tell, because we have limited inventory available in the market. The manufacturing index, which is critical to our economy, dropped about 1.7 points last month. It's still at 55. Now remember, anything over 50 basis points is very solid within the economy. You drop below that, which we did maybe a year ago, then there's concerns about either being in a recession or entering into a recession. Now we'll take a look at factory orders. So factory orders jumped 2.2% last month to 557 billion in the month of March. So this is good news. It's still very strong in terms of factory orders. Now, small business confidence level, owners of the small companies basically dropped again for the 3rd consecutive month. There's a lot of concerns, and the index, if you will, is at 93 right now, which is below the 100 target market. Still a lot of concerns with small business confidence across the board. Consumer confidence edged down again in April. It dropped down it's dropped down a meager 0.5 point. It's still at 106 and 107 areas. Keep in mind, this is critical because the baseline for this is 100. Now, crude oil, which is a real concern that we have, as I said, in the month of May, when I cut this off, it was at $110.30 a barrel. And that's up from $102.70 a barrel back in April, late April. Now, one of the comments that came back is people like Norm and myself and Whip, etc., go back to 1973, I believe. You remember when we had odd and even because we had a lack of gasoline? Well, the concerns are now that if we don't start bringing more oil to the market, products to the market, that later in the year, there could be a problem with inventory levels across the board. Now, that came out this morning. Again, it's just a discussion, but you know, no hard facts, but they're just kind of raising this so people understand what's going on. Now we look at the housing market. The housing starts slipped at 0.2 points last month, and that's not a surprise. New home sales across the country, all aboard, we saw a decline of 16.6% during the month. This is the 4th monthly decline with the second month of double-digit percentages. However, if we look at California, in Los Angeles County, the median price rose, if you can believe this, 2.6%. The inventory on hand right now, the midpoint is at roughly $102,000, $802,000 for property, and sales were up 2.9% last month. Orange County, the median rose 1.5% to 1,325,000, which is incredible, and sales were up by 4.3%. And we look at Orange County, San Diego County, where I'm located, the median rose 2.6%. The average for those products on the market is around 975, but sales did fall by 1.3%. Existing home sales for new old houses, if you will, that declined by 2.4%. Now we'll see as we move into the summertime, June, July, and August, when families start thinking about moving, we'll see what happens to volume and movement in the marketplace. We'll see more of that over the next 90 days. The productivity index, as you know, goes to a quarterly time frame, so I should have information on that by the end of July. Now, the following companies, again, we've been lucky over the last several months about layoffs of significance. So if you're familiar with Rocket Mortgage, they're asking for a retirement of 8% of their employees. Otherwise, they're going to eliminate 2,000 jobs. And then there's a company called Carvana. They're a car buying service. They just eliminated 2,500 jobs. So other companies are having some layoffs. If you look at Netflix, had a layoff about a week ago. Small numbers, but small numbers being laid off. And then there's some companies in San Diego that have begun to put a freeze on hiring. And we'll see where that goes and how long it'll last. So now let's take a look at mergers and acquisitions. JCPenney's, as you know, was bought by a group early last year. They're now looking to buy their arch rival, Kohl's. Kohl's, as you know, has been in trouble for a long time. The deal is worth about $8.6 billion. The idea there is to offer more products and build and expand their inventories in that area. So that's the purpose of the deal. And Pfizer is completing an acquisition of Arima Pharmaceutical for just under $7 billion. And what that is that basically it's a clinical stage company that develops innovative therapies and treatment for several immune deficiencies and diseases. Now we look at AMD, which is a major company. They're buying a company called Pensando Systems for $1.9 billion. Basically, that company specializes in distributed computing for cloud computing, networking, storage, and security services. KPMG, one of the big four, announced that what they're doing is they've announced the acquisition of a Canada-based security company called Fortica. And the deal is worth, we have not specified the terms of the deal. However, this reinforces cloud security presence in Quebec. Synopsys, another electronics design automation powerhouse in the Bay Area, is expanding its reach into the cybersecurity business with the acquisition of an application of a firm called White Hat Security for $330 million. This is a group of guys that have spent a lot of time in security. It's a great consulting firm, and now they're being acquired. So what else is taking place? Well, all of us use Zoom. And so Zoom got nailed to the barn door. Basically, it was a class action lawsuit that was just settled due to sessions being disrupted by outsiders. Now, the incidents are referred to, quote, as Zoom bombing, which includes one that had a pornography situation enter into a Bible studies class. So that was one of them in the class action lawsuit. But again, they've taken care of a lot of the issues. General Motors announced that for those of you that have Corvettes or like Corvettes, they're going to be building electric Corvettes going forward. And they'll have a version of an all-electric vehicle coming up over the next couple of years. For those of you that are looking for a used car, you better keep your wallet in your pocket. Used car prices over 2021 are up 30%. It's amazing. It's hard to find cars. Again, keep in mind, we still have a problem with semiconductor chips for new vehicles. And that's still going to be prevalent for the ongoing time frame. I told you a couple of months ago that Intel and others are building 6 or 7 chip manufacturing plants in the state of Arizona, and also a complex being built in Ohio. That's going to still take another 2 to 3 years before they come online, before we get back in the chip business. Now, worker output in the first quarter fell by 7.5%, and that's the worst decline since 1947. And again, companies are still struggling with higher labor costs and also COVID cases. So you still see that taking place. Tesla, which is a well-known name for everybody else, well, they just had another recall of 130,000 vehicles for overheating and infotainment systems. So this is involving models like from 2021, 22. If you have a Model 3, a Y, etc., all of those cars are being called back for software changes. Now, one of the things that took place, I talked to people in Silicon Valley, and Ed Snyder knows a lot of the same folks we've talked to, and that is there's beginning to be a freeze on hiring in the Bay Area in the technology space. And in some places, companies are beginning to lay people off. So there's a hangover basically taking place from hiring on the binge, where companies were wondering of hiring as many people as they can. Now they're going to stop and see what's going to take place. As you heard this morning, Apple announced that they basically have cut production of phones because of the lack of chips a certain level. So that's going to have an impact on new phones coming to the marketplace. And then Hyundai Motors is building a $5.5 billion plant for electric vehicle plant, which is going to be built in Georgia. They're going to break ground in early 2023. What that will do, the intentions are to build 300 electric vehicles a year. So that kind of takes us through what's taking place right now. What I'd like to do is open it up for Q&A.